morning, everyone. Sorry I'm a bit late. I apologise for that. Just a few housekeeping. As you know, if there's a fire drill, we have to evacuate the building by the stairs. Don't use the lift and gather in front of Victoria statue. Now, Victoria statue, right? We are live web streaming today, so when we do speak, when anybody does speak, just press the microphone. We have one apology, which is Councillor Hugh Mason. Is that correct?
That's right. I've heard just from Councillor Mason.
I also understand that Councillor Bosher is not attending today. He had a meeting in Cambridge, which he wasn't sure whether he could get to, but he might have decided to try, rather than... I don't know why, since this is such an exciting meeting to attend.
I also see that we have no deputations today. Having looked through the agenda since the pre-meeting, what I would intend to do today is to do the minutes, since all the officers are here and to clear them, and then move to the items towards the back. Starting with number, is it 6? Where am I? 7.
Chairman.
Yeah.
So I was wondering if I could actually make a point about this, because
Go on.
the briefing,
Oh, sorry, wait a minute.
the briefing pack is not the same as what we've got today. There are various elements added to it, and having marked up the briefing pack, I had to go right the way through another 375 pages, which weren't actually synonymous. Can I just suggest that the pagination of this is that each section is A, B, C, D and E with the numbers attaching on the pages to it, which would mean that I'd know, and anyone else would know, what had been added between the briefing meeting and the papers that come out for this meeting, because it does take a long time to read once, let alone twice.
I think that's a fair point, and there is a lot more bits of paper here, but what I want to do, as you probably see from that, is to, for the next GANS, i.e. after the municipal elections, to look at the process and procedure and all the rest, and see how we can, not curtail, but decide what information we actually really need as a committee and do it that. But yeah, is that something could be tried for the next meeting, Michael, ABCs? And what was that, pagination? What was that word?
Pagination. Oh, and you could even call it remuneration as opposed to simply call it remuneration and get that wrong too.
Okay.
Either way, to help.
Okay, can we do the minutes then of the... Oh, no, sorry, declarations. Any declarations of interest? Over there? Okay. It's rising. Okay. So page 1. Okay. Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I got two sets. When you say page 1, do you mean page 7?
No, do I? I've got an old... I'm with you, Ian. I've got the old set.
Can I just explain? There's a colour set that has page 1, etc., and then the pack, the way the packs go together, it's consecutive, so they'll have different numbers. But they're minutes 65 onwards, if you want to refer to the minute numbers rather than the pages.
Sorry, 65 to 67. Seven continues over the page, okay, with various things need to happen. Remember the committee asked for more detail made available about IT network. I haven't seen that. Has that happened?
I responded to the officer coordination with an answer, and I've also got a briefing from that answer today.
I think, Chairman, I think there is a briefing note which has been circulated as well. We sent out a consolidated note to members dealing with all the points which were arising, which is this. This was sent out by email to everybody.
Yep. At the back of the minute.
And so members should find the response in there, with also the note that if any individual member has concerns which remain, please contact Mr. Povey directly to discuss it, rather than dealing with it within the meeting, because it tends to elongate the meeting.
Let's confirm that's page 17 in the pack now, the appendix to minutes dated 2nd November. Is that the one you're talking about? That's page 17, 18, 19 and 20. Could I just make the point that they're not really that explanatory? Just make the point they're not really that, they don't go into much detail, and there's not enough, one paragraph about occupational therapy. It's probably true, but it isn't detailed enough. It says, Portsmouth, whilst there is often a waiting list for OTs, this does not usually impact on discharge from hospital. Well, that's no good at all. That just means that more than 50% of the time it doesn't do it. So I'd like to have a much more structured answer, which actually says 25 out of 100, for example, and actually percentage, rather than this does not usually impact, because you can make that word mean anything.
Chairman, to try and assist...
My reading of that, Ian, and that's why I think we need to do, as a rule, was exceptionally. That was mine, rather than 50% or up to 50% or whatever. But that was my reading.
I think that, was this not dealt with by Andy Biddle in the briefing session? He turned up to the briefing session, which was the intention to answer any questions which they might have. The note I've got, because as you know I wasn't able to be there, Andy Biddle attended briefing and provided an update, and will also attend, well, he isn't here today because we have actually sent round a note from him giving the information. So he is offering to meet with any member who's got particular concerns which they feel haven't been addressed.
Yeah, I mean, can I say that prior to me coming on this chair here, I've been put on this chair, they have been concerned about adult social care as well as children's, and a meeting would have or should have taken place. It hadn't. So I thought the best thing to do was to get a briefing note of some sort for this meeting again, which is now got the appendix.
Very grateful. I just think that it's pretty paltry. It seems to me that it's deserving of at least a one side of A4 to describe exactly what it means. The point I was making at the last meeting was I personally know of circumstances where somebody's broken a hip at 90 or whatever and is stuck in hospital because occupational therapy can't get round to sorting out what needs to happen in their residence. So they are sitting there for weeks maybe, waiting 2 to 3 weeks for occupational therapy to come round, and they are therefore in a bed they don't need in a hospital that needs their bed for someone else. And that was the point I was making, and this does not address it.
Okay, that's a fair point. We'll note that and ask for more information on that, Ian. Okay. Right. On the MMD, this has been going on for some time. What I've suggested, and I see it's happened, is that, because you were particularly concerned about this, Ian, that somebody agrees a date with you if you want a presentation, and then we tell the other members and see if they want or can go along to it. Is that okay? I've seen an email, I think.
That meeting is now being organised, I understand. Yeah.
Received an email. The thing that does actually worry me, of course, is that it's mentioned quite heavily in the internal audit report that we're getting that we hadn't had before, when we made the suggestion at the last meeting or the meeting before that we needed, in fact, the meeting before that and the meeting before that we needed a meeting on MMD. It's quite clear that the big internal audit issues are around IT and MMD. I'm assuming that we won't be able to address them today because there's going to be nobody here who can answer the questions we might have.
I think that's right. There isn't anybody here, is there?
Well, we'll see where we can go, but I suspect we won't be able to answer the detail.
Is that okay? The next bullet point was the briefing we talked about. That was adult social care and also children's services. So there's a bit appended to the minute here, and I don't know if that covers the points that you were concerned about.
There's also a typo, which I think that Tanzania would find interesting, because Councillor High Mason rather than Councillor Hugh Mason, and he is obviously high in many respects, but I hadn't anticipated there was actually a name. That's in 4 up from the...
Corrected, yes. We spotted that.
Yes, that's been corrected in the main pack. It was spotted at the briefing.
Okay, I'm still on. You see, the point. That's the point about...
I don't know about the next one there, which you raised, Ian, about the Oracle. I haven't seen any email or any. Has anything happened on that? Do we know?
I think what was suggested in the briefing session, the note I received, was Councillor Lyon to be invited to the next EBS board meeting to be able to address concerns. So we're.
Do we know when that will be?
I do actually. It's on the 7th of February. But we will always reorganise that if that's a date which you can't meet.
I actually have to go to funeral.
Yeah, well,
Actually, no, I'm doing it on the 8th and 6th, 7th, I noticed.
I'll get Francis to contact you and we'll get a date which is mutually convenient.
And again, once a date's agreed, could we notify other members of the committee, see if they're able or want to attend? Is that okay?
Certainly, yeah.
On the last bullet point there, the last bullet point, there has been correspondence between yourself and Michael either on the scrutiny management panel and its terms of reference, and you've been misunderstood, you're saying.
Well, I haven't received a reply to that. The point I was making is we don't want to tread on the toes of the scrutiny management panel, obviously, even though some of us are on both of them. It's just that when we send our report in to the auditors, the external auditors every year, we vouchsafe that the SMP panel is doing the two things it's asked to do. One is to advise on policy, and the other is to scrutinise the administration, and we are not really doing that apart from call-ins. So I'm not suggesting that we tell them what to do. I'm asking whether or not they feel happy that they are doing what we are vouchsafing that they are doing.
Okay.
Does that make any sense?
Well, it does. It makes sense in the sense, I mean, I'm the Vice Chair of the Scrutiny Management Committee, and we had a bit of discussion on this on Monday. So it's moving forward, because again, what we want to identify is what the brief of each committee is, rather than go outside it and then keep getting information which may not need or whatever. So yeah, that's been looked at, Ian. Okay, so that's page 2, is that everybody happy with page 2? Oh, I'm saying, sorry, up to 68. 68, and then the next page, there's the last, in 68, the last bullet point is about modern records, and I think that's been dealt with.
Sorry, Chairman, is that when we talked about RAG, I thought that we had made a very clear steer that we didn't want directors to mark their own homework, and therefore that at least somebody else should be looking to see whether they agreed with the red, amber, green categorisation. And I can tell you there are a plethora of ones in the report when we get to it, where had I been supervising the director's assessment of whether it was green, amber or red, I would have put a very different RAG. And the other thing that we had asked as well was that we were told what the previous rating was, because at the moment all we see is the current standing and not whether it's going up or down. Because as any auditor would tell you, they like to see what happened before as opposed to just what's happening right now. And again, having asked for that, it seems not to have happened.
Okay, any comments? John?
Perhaps if I can pick that up when we get onto the performance item later on the agenda, that might be helpful.
Thank you. All right. Anything else? Anything else on that page? Oh, you've done it. Okay. So. Okay, minute 69. Okay, minute 70. Minute 71. At the very end of 71, there's something about the shift awards in 2017. I think I've seen something, a reply on that. Haven't I?
Yes, in this briefing note, Chairman, we've provided a rather detailed response from the officers concerned, which I hope explains the situation.
Okay, thank you. 72, minute 72. Please go.
Sorry. What we've discovered in the MMD internal audit is that they weren't complying with the gift element, and I wonder whether the solicitor might at this stage explain why it is that they weren't on the circulation of people having to do that, and that it was overlooked.
I think because at the time when the Gifts and Hospitality Register was set up, it was set up in relation to PCC employees and staff, rather than MMD, which was a different company not owned by the council at that time. When it became owned by PCC, it continued to have its own standards, rules and protocols, and we're now trying to align those more closely. So that's just something which we should have picked up on and we didn't.
Thank you for that. Thank you. 72, minute 72 of the minutes, minute 73 of the minutes, minute 74, minute 75. Just the very last paragraph there, Michael, you were going to review whether Appendix A could be opened and published.
And I think what we've said in the note which has been circulated, that we'll endeavour to do that in future for future reports, but it wasn't written on that basis for this occasion. I'm looking to my procurement colleagues.
I think that's a fair point. So the steers towards being open unless there are particular reasons it shouldn't be.
We'll do that.
Okay, 76. 76 are on lots. One of you. Go on, Ian.
That's clearly a one issue thing, but there are a lot of waivers on the grounds that we couldn't get 3 bids, and I also think that is a reflection of the fact that in the city we're not allowing smaller and medium-sized enterprises access to providing council services with the ease that we should be, because after all we want them to do well and we want to be promoting them to do our services rather than have huge monopolies doing them across the city.
Greg.
Yeah, we do review the waivers, and we do that quite thoroughly. So we often will, if there is an issue around free quotes, ask for how they've established value for money. I'm more than welcome to meet with Councillor Lyons separately and review a whole load of examples, if that would be a course to do.
Could I just point out you can't meet with Councillor Lyons, he doesn't exist. It's Councillor Lyon. Okay. There are a few bits there about a construction company, and there's going to be a report back to members. I don't know if anything's happened on that. This is Knights Brown Construction Limited.
They were responded to, and I believe they're in the same note that's at the back of the pack.
That's correct, yeah. Point 13 at the back of the notes. Yep, I think we've covered all of those points, Chairman.
So they're all covered as far as you're concerned. So anything else on 76, minute 76? Is that okay? Can we agree the minutes? Lovely, thank you very much for that. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Yeah, I'll be late at, I keep forgetting it's been streamed over, so it's, I'm going around the table now, okay. I'm Councillor Madden, Chair of this committee.
John Ferret, Councillor for Paulsgrove.
Councillor Neil Young, Ward Councillor for Copner.
Ian Lyon, Councillor for Nelson.
Michael Lloyd, Finance Manager for Technical and Financial Planning.
Julian Pike, Deputy Director of Finance.
Paul Somerset, Deputy Chief Internal Auditor. David White, External Audit Manager for Ernst & Young.
Helen Thompson, Associate Partner from Ernst & Young.
John Bale, Director of Human Resources, Legal and Performance.
Michael Lawther, Deputy Chief Executive.
Joanne Miles-Smith, Democratic Services.
Helen, come and join us. And then introduce yourself.
Helen Magri, Corporate Information Governance Officer and Data Protection Officer for the Council.
Okay, thank you very much. Can we then do, I'm hoping it's going to be quick, but it may not be, but if we do from item 8 onwards, there are no confidential reports this time. So item 8 is a security breach report. Michael? Or is Helen, are you doing it? Okay, thank you.
This is a regular report to Governance and Audit and Standards. We've provided the appendix which gives an overview of the breaches that have occurred. We have not had any response from the ICO on any previously reported breaches since the last report. They're tending to take about 6 months to get back to us at the moment on any breaches, so we've got a couple outstanding, but we haven't had any further news. There was just one breach reported to the ICO in the last period, and that was a lost mobile phone. That's on page 3 of the incident log. But all others were deemed to be minor breaches and not reportable.
There's a notebook containing details and case notes that's also reported, I think on page 2, top page 2.
Oh, sorry, yeah, I do apologise. Yes, that was reported. So we have two that were reported.
Just said that I know that we're...
You are correct. So we're awaiting the ICO outcome on those 2 breaches.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Open to members.
Can I confirm, ask whether or not there have been any comebacks from previous incidents that we obviously not looking at the instance up until the loss of 3 months or so. Has the Information Commissioner come back to us on anything that we have seen in the last 2 or 3 years?
No,
6 months.
the only ones that we have had a response from the ICO on have already been reported, and all of those occasions they have come back and suggested no further action is required. So there is a high volume of breaches being reported to the ICO at the moment. Following GDPR, I think councils probably are reporting more breaches than previously, and on a couple of occasions, the ICO have actually suggested to us that there was no need to report a breach that we have reported. So we've taken that into account, and we are endeavouring only to report breaches that they really need us to report. So, but they clearly have quite a number that they're having to look at based on the timescale that they're taking to come back to us. So.
Okay, Ian, thank you. John?
Yeah, it's a similar vein. When the GDPR came in, there was a lot of discussion around it. This idea that it would be, there'd be these guys watching us, everything we do. It feels a bit like the Wizard of Oz, in that there's probably one guy in an office somewhere in Whitehall looking at all of this stuff and not being able to cope. So, do we get a sense that the ICO are under-resourced, or they're inundated with stuff, or do we get feedback from other councils, other organisations, that there's a similar delay in dealing with this stuff?
Yeah, I think they are inundated and probably under-resourced. I don't think they probably were able to gauge the volume of breaches that would be reported. So new under the GDPR is this requirement to report a breach within 72 hours. So they're requesting that we report a breach probably before it's fully investigated. And sometimes you will report a breach that actually turns out not to be a breach at all. But the requirement to report in such a short time frame means that we probably are over-reporting and that probably is every authority, to be honest. You know, the threat of a financial penalty for not reporting in the timescale in that 72 hours means that we probably are all reporting more than we did previously. So, you know, it may be that we go back and report that something we thought was a breach didn't turn out to be, but the initial report that we have to send through because of the short timescale doesn't allow us always to fully investigate.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian.
It's for the case of the ones you've told us have been reported were the ones we reported. They haven't been they've been retracted, is what you're saying. So there are only 2 that we've actually reported to the ICO.
We've reported 2. They've acknowledged receipt in this since the last meeting. Yes.
So none of the extra ones were mistakenly put in the 76 hours and then withdrawn or anything. That's
no,
right.
No. But so we've reported 2, which we believe were breaches that needed to be reported, but we haven't had a response from the ICO. They've acknowledged receipt, but they haven't come back to us with further information at this point. So.
Thank you, members. Can we note that report? Thank you. Can we go on to agenda item 9, which is General Data Protection Regulation Programme Report? I take it that's you, Helen, as well.
Yes, yeah, that report's from me as well. So we were asked just to report, provide an overview of the preparation that we did, ready for GDPR in May 2018. So we provided an overview in the report and just gave a summary of the work that's still ongoing and will always be ongoing. We'll always be looking at ways that we can make sure the council complies. So we're really trying to move to a business as usual situation now. It's 9 months since the legislation came into force. So, you know, we're trying to make sure that all of our processes ensure that everything we do is compliant. So that's what we're moving towards. So the new things that we're doing are reported there. We've got new training that is available for councillors. So we were asked just to include that in the report as well. There's an online training package that's a bespoke package for councillors that will be available through the Portsmouth Learning Gateway. But yes, there is still work ongoing. There's a lot that we need to look at. So one of the big pieces is looking at all of our contracts, and there may be further amendments to be made post-Brexit as well, depending on what the outcome is. So there may be a period following Brexit, depending on whether we leave with or without a deal, where we may or may not be able to share data outside of the UK. So we need to prepare for that as well. But that's sort of not, we haven't got guidance on that at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Helen. Open to members. Okay. Helen, for that update, thank you. Item 10 is a report on complaints received into alleged breaches of the Code of Conduct by members of the Council for the calendar year 2018. Michael.
Thank you, Chairman. Members, this is the annual report which I provide as your monitoring officer too on the complaints which were made. You'll see in the middle column gives details about the complaints and the action which has been taken in respect to each of them. What I would say is the number of complaints remains low, although it is still active. We do have a small number of people who obviously, and as you can see, these are public complaints which we received, who do raise complaints with us in relation to members' conduct. I'm not making any suggestions this year to modifications to the scheme. It seems to be working efficiently.
Could I ask just one question? Because I actually don't know any of the members involved here, which is probably... Well, yeah, I know it's members. Could I look at number 3? And this is just as opposed for assurance to the public. Number 3, something's happened. The very end says the action agreed was that the Deputy Monitoring Officer to write to the subject member and invite him, so it's a bloke, to send a written apology to the complainants having reflected on his conduct. And do we leave it at that, or do we follow up to see if the person's done it?
Oh yes, we would follow it up. The difficulty is, of course, that there is little by way of sanction which is available once they've been asked to do that. there's nothing further really which we can do. The sanctions available to the council in respect of members who breach the code are very limited.
Would we tell the complainant that we've done that we've written to asking that they get an apology?
Yes, the decision letter goes to the subject member and also to the complainant, so they will know what's expected of them. And I suppose if the subject member didn't write the apology, we could get another complaint saying they were asked to write an apology and hadn't done that.
Thank you. Members? You okay? Ian?
Possible to just take the gender out of this each time, because otherwise I was guessing as to who it might be. So, because the next one's a herself, and I think I can guess who that was, and the one before is a himself, and I think I can guess who that was too. But I mean, ultimately, by even putting the gender into the report, you're telling us a little more information than I suspect you as a solicitor would like to impart.
Yep, we'll make it the subject member in future, which is what it should be.
Yeah, I think in the past we used to name the member, didn't we?
When we got to the end of it, I think in the past we were required to name the member.
Is that okay on that? Is that okay on item 10? Can we note that? Thank you, members.
Members, we have a whistleblowing policy which staff are actively encouraged to use if they feel that there's staff and members of the public, if there's a matter of public concern at work which they feel should be raised. This is open to staff and it's open to contractors who work with the council as well. It's publicised and it's refreshed its availability through our various communications and comms team throughout the year. As you can see, there are a small number of cases which were referred to the whistleblowing panel. Whistleblowing panel is made up of myself, John Bell, Chris Ward or his deputy, and also Lizzie from Internal Audit or her deputy. And the complaints then are normally investigated by Internal Audit unless we feel it's more appropriate that it's actually referred over as an management investigation. As you can see, there are, I suppose 4 of the matters raised have been concluded and the 5th one is currently open and under investigation. Where it says referred to department for further work, this is in relation to a parking enforcement officer. It was alleged there was a public concern because there was inaccurate recording of the hours of work. It was actually really, when we got down to it at the end of the day, it was a management matter. Therefore, it was referred back to management for them to take appropriate action in relation to the employee who was inaccurately recording their hours of work.
Okay, thank you. Michael, these are the ones, the appendix are the ones referred. Were the ones that weren't referred, were all the ones that were considered but decided no further action was taken? Need to be taken.
The only other ones which we received, we decided weren't whistleblowing because they couldn't possibly relate to something which is of public concern, and sometimes it was contractual disputes and disagreements which people were having with the council, which were dealt with under other processes, or general complaints which then would go back to the council's corporate complaints team and dealt with by them. It has to be, if we're going to look at it under the whistleblowing procedure, something which would raise a great public concern about the council's processes, and when we get into them on these occasions, to be honest, there wasn't really anything of great substance in them. But we're still pleased to receive them because there sometimes can be learning points from them. And in this occasion, say in relation to the park enforcement officer, there was a disciplinary matter there which needed to be addressed.
Can I just, sorry, I'll be in a sec. Sorry, just one more for me. Can I just confirm that the whistleblower is never named to anybody else within the establishment?
The whistleblower is a protected informant and cannot be named.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, can I just make it be clear, what you're saying that is that you decide what is whistleblowing, what isn't, and presumably quite a lot of the things that some people might think of whistleblowing are actually employment disputes more than anything else. They don't like the manager or something, and so there can be a...
There is a filtering process, yeah.
Yes, but when you say close, no further action, you mean that you've looked at it and you disagree that there is anything to pursue, or that it has actually happened and you dealt with it?
On each of those occasions we decided that no further action was required because what was alleged did not amount to something which warranted us taking any further steps. There was not something of sufficient concerns raised. We have to be very mindful of the fact that you're using up a lot of officer time dealing with complaints, And sometimes complaints, unfortunately, are raised on a sort of tit-for-tat basis. People are dissatisfied, employees fall out and so forth. And we get things raised to us which we have to put back somewhere else. It has to go back as a management issue, and you'll say to the manager, you need to resolve this issue within your service, within these particular people.
So then, if someone is now not identified or is not a whistleblower, does that mean they can be identified? So if they've gone to you in the guise of being a whistleblower and they think they're protected, and you decide that they're not actually whistleblowing, is their identity still protected in that when they started they thought they would be protected, and when they finished they might not qualify?
I'm looking to Paul. I can't think of a particular instance where we've actually identified somebody. I think we normally get round it in other ways, don't we?
Yeah, I don't think we've had that situation, but if we did, I think obviously we consider the impact of whether that person needed to be named and whether it would impact on us investigating. Sometimes obviously we then need to talk to the people and subsequent people to get to the bottom of the investigation, so I think we'd have to take that on a case-by-case basis, but it hasn't happened in my memory.
It hasn't been an issue. Just enlarging it slightly, it is possible that when we're undergoing whistleblowing investigations, as we have in the past, we get stuck because we actually need to be able to identify the person, in which case we cannot do that without their consent.
Only they would know, and therefore the other person would know that they're the only people who would know.
Yeah, it could be quite obvious.
As an example, yes.
Is that okay, members? Okay, well, the item says, note the report and consider whether any further action is required by them. I just wondered if the further action was that we get every whistleblowing case, whether it's referred or not, i.e. just to see how many people are actually whistleblowing in that sense, Mike. Is that okay?
We'll extend the list, yes.
Okay. Is that okay, members? Okay, thank you. Item 12 is obviously Constitution, Part 4D, Protocol for Member / Officer Relations.
Yes, member, this is one of the protocols under the Constitution. You do give me wide-ranging powers to make amendments to the Constitution to reflect structural changes to the law, and also to deal with topographical errors which occasionally arise. But this isn't one of them. The group leaders had a concern that upon occasions we're perhaps not as helpful as we could be as officers, and therefore they wanted the protocol amended to make it clear that, of course, council officers work for all elected members and should be providing equal support to them, subject to the administrative resources being available. And also we should extend that support when it's in relation to Portsmouth City Council matters to our elected members of Parliament. They just thought it was sensible that we should put something down in writing, and that's what I've tried to achieve on page 365.
Okay, thank you. So this is I'm just taking the underlined bits that are the changes.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, I did make an amendment at the pre-meeting, but it hasn't appeared.
I think I agree with this in principle, but 6.6.6 does rather tie your hands. So say, for example, a Member of Parliament comes to talk to you about a particular specific issue that relates to a ward, or that indeed you might want to talk to the leader of the council about it. It tells you cannot at all. Doesn't even allow you to get permission from the Member of Parliament or whomever it is, or another member, to allow you to do it. So I would redraft that to say without permission, for example, without their consent. And the content of any such discussion does actually is incredibly broad. So I think any sensitive content matter, I know politically sensitive content matter, I would actually be...
I'd prefer I didn't do that, because I don't want officers to exercise those judgments. I think it's just quite simple. If an MP comes, seeks advice, we provide the advice. If we do feel that it's something which then needs to be related on, then we get their consent at that stage. Keep it as...
It could be any member as well, couldn't it?
Yeah, it's same with members as well too, yeah. So just keep...
So you'll have to go with permission then?
Yeah, yes, with consent.
Just there's another point that's raised since I had the meeting last week. 664. I didn't think that there's members of Parliament and information they're entitled to, and I didn't think that officers may was strong enough. So I suggested to change that to officers should. There may be circumstances when members of Parliament, like other members, aren't entitled to information. There's 666, the new 664, Ian. They say officers may also provide information. Yeah. Oh.
I've got political group meetings whilst they form part of the...
Tonight, the new 6.4. Is that-
I'm trying to save money.
yeah.
They wouldn't have me on Coldline, no.
Is that okay? I mean, is there any reason why that shouldn't be should rather than may?
Chairman, can you repeat the question?
I'm saying, so it says officers may also provide advice this to members of Parliament. I'm saying that's strong enough and it should be should give advice, but if there's some reason that the member of Parliament, like any other member, can't get it, it'll be explained to them. But I think may just gives it too open. Ian, you're,
I think should is good.
yeah, I just to make it a bit stronger.
It's an equal parity
Yeah.
in terms of access to... The consideration I know personally that they have staff, etc., and they get quite a lot of generic complaints that I think it'd be useful for the council to know sooner than they currently do, and to be able to respond to them much sooner than they currently do.
Could I just go to the and I picked it up before and I forgot about it, but it's now 6.62.
6.6.2.
6.6.2. Yeah. Right, unless otherwise agreed in advance with the Chief Executive, officers will not attend particular meetings that include persons who are not members. In my whole experience in this council, whatever group I've been in, they've always been outside members there, elected by the party. So that seems, in a way, a bit of a nonsense, unless it's a carte blanche from the Chief Exec to senior officers just to go to it. Or does it mean that having been invited to talk about something at a group meeting, they have to ask whether outside members are going to be there, i.e. not councillors, and if so, is it all right if they go? I suspect that doesn't happen in practice, Michael.
You're absolutely correct. I've attended group meetings and there are often outside members there. There'll be political representatives and especially different groups do that. I think we're just trying to reserve our position because there will be occasions when we could be invited to a group meeting where there'll be information which we don't want to share with non-councillors.
Yeah, I accept that. I accept that. Yeah, I accept that.
Yeah.
But that's not what it says. It says that all of you, have got to go cap in hand to the Chief Executive and say, is it all right, sir, if I go along to the meeting? Well, no, it just seems nonsense to me, that's all.
Yeah, that's what it presently says. Would you like me to attempt to put it the other way round? I understand the concern which you've got. It hasn't proved to be a practical difficulty for officers going. I suggest it works in practice. I'm not sure how else I can word it, but because we do need to be able to reserve the position for the Chief Executive to say the officers can't go.
I know, but it seems a bit... It just seems a bit nonsensical. I think it's an officer I could walk in a room, says, anybody who's not a councillor here? Oh, I don't know him. I can't stay. I haven't got permission from the Chief Executive.
The Chief Executive reserves the right to prohibit officers from attending political group meetings.
What a very sensible suggestion. You happy with that?
I don't care. I don't. If people come to a group meeting and say they can't be there because they need the Chief Exec's permission, I'll be a bit concerned about that, Michael, in future. I'm not bothered. It's just it doesn't work in practice, does it? And why then have it in?
I think what the solicitor is arguing is simply that there needs to be the power to do it for the Chief Executive to forbid if necessary. So actually, if the right is reserved to him to do precisely that, rather than somebody having to ask permission to go, that probably solves that problem.
I'd be happy with that, but could you then at a management meeting of some sort point this out to people but say that it's only if they're concerned, okay, rather than people having to adhere to it?
The reality is the people who are normally asked to go to these meetings will be myself, Chris Ward or the Chief Executive, and we will exercise our judgment. Our directors, yeah. So, and they will know that they will have the Chief Executive's authority to say yes or no to attend.
Okay, anything else on item 12, members? Okay with that? Thank you. This? Yeah, it's just, does this go to council? It goes to
Change
council.
the constitution has to go to council.
Okay, so that'll be up next week?
Yes, please,
Okay. Is that okay, members?
with those amendments.
Thank you. Thank you. So item 13 is delegated authority to the city solicitor to settle claims on behalf of the council. Mike?
Yeah, at present, our excess limit on insurance claims is £75,000. That was increased a year or so ago. It was previously £50,000, which was why it was up to the excess limit. My authority to settle was up to £50,000. We do sometimes have claims which we're settling slightly above that level. Therefore, I'd like to have parity between my authority and the excess limit. I also have authority to settle, which you granted to me some considerable number of years ago, industrial injury claims up to, I think it's, nobody's here to tell me, but I think it's up to £250,000. Those tend to be disease claims which result from matters such as asbestosis and so forth. We get a few of these sadly coming in each year, which generally I'm able to settle. But apart from that one particular exclusion, I'm asking generally my authority to extend up to £75,000.
Yeah, I have no problem with that. Members, John?
Yeah, obviously I understand what an excess is, but could you just explain in the context of this report what the excess limit refers to?
Okay. I mean, as you all know, your car insurance or whatever, you have an excess of £250 or £500. That's the bit you have to meet. The council's in a fortuitous situation with our insurers that they allow us to handle any claim which is below the excess which the council would have to pay if the claim is found against us. That's exceptional. There's not very many councils in the country who are actually allowed to do that. The benefit for us is it keeps down our insurance premium overall, which is a considerable sum of money, and it also reduces our costs because we have people in-house who handle these claims for us. So it's mutually beneficial for the insurers and for ourselves as well. So at the moment, if a claim comes in which looks like it's going to be under £50,000, we're able to negotiate it and settle it on behalf of the council. Increasing it to £75,000 would be helpful because at the moment they would negotiate it and then I would have to go off and get specific authority to settle a claim if it's in excess of that sum. No doubt in due course that excess will increase again, and we do renegotiate the excess with the insurers from time to time because the higher the excess, the lower the premium which we pay. And our premium is pretty considerable because you can imagine the liability which we've got between, with all the amount of public open space and buildings and so forth which we own within the city.
Okay, John? Yeah.
So there isn't any specific claim you have in mind at the moment between 50,000 and 75,000 that you prefer us not to know about?
No, there was something which came up recently which I needed authority to settle, I think £69,000, and I thought, well, this is a little bit silly, because to actually get that specific authority results in quite a lot of work being generated, whereas if it had been 50,000, I could have got ahead and done it. It's also better if I have the delegated authority, because then we can get on and do these claims and settle them and satisfy people's concerns quicker.
Well, that question is, I don't think I've ever seen a schedule of claims we have settled as a council in front of JNS, which seems to me strange since presumably we are the final arbiter, at least, to say that's a good or a bad thing. And so we have never, I don't think we've scrutinised anything like this, and it probably would be sensible. I mean, it sort of takes me on to having gone to the Director of Complaints to inform her that we had a complaint in another department which had been going for 10 years and she wasn't aware of it, or of the other 57 complaints that had been going for quite a while in the same department. Because presumably the thing is, what we are here to do is to look into these things and say, why is it taking so long, or why is the system broken down, or just to satisfy ourselves that taxpayers' money is being spent in a correct fashion.
Yeah, I'm happy to provide that, and hope you'll find it of no interest.
Okay, members, can we agree then, item 13? Yeah. Thank you. Item 14 is an update on the quality impact assessment monitoring. Hi, Gina. How are you? Welcome.
Good morning. I'm just here to give you an update on the Equality Impact Assessment monitoring. As you know, the Council makes use of the EIA process to identify any potential equality issues and any measures that can be used to eliminate or mitigate any disproportional negative impact. EIAs are a way to provide a mechanism for members to question prior to a decision being made. Where required, committee reports have a completed EIA attached before they go forward for decision. The Council does have a well-established equality impact assessment process which contributes to our equality duty. The process requires that a preliminary EIA is required at the initial stage of redesign, development of a policy or a service. If the prelim EIA identifies a potential negative impact, then a full EIA should be undertaken. When a full EIA is undertaken, that should take into account any consultation results, relevant local and national information, including effects or similar initiatives across the UK. EIAs are only one form of the mechanism that assists the Council in its meeting its responsibilities under public sector quality duty, and they're not a legal requirement in themselves. Since changing the process in 2016, there are no omissions of EIAs, as committee reports will not go forward unless they have been completed. All committee reports have their EIAs attached, which are published on the website. So this gives an opportunity for interested persons to question the EIA before a decision is made. In 2018, 85 EIAs were completed, 78 were preliminary, and 7, which was 8%, were full EIAs. I'll give you a list of the EIAs that were completed in Appendix 1. And what we're going to do is EIAs that are not part of a committee report, they'll be published on the Council's website on a year rolling programme.
Okay, thank you, Gina. Just get down. So 3.4, paragraph 3.4 is new then. We're going to, the last thing you mentioned, that's something new we're going to do. And presumably the EIAs that we do as in the appendix are on the website anyway, yeah?
Yeah, all EIAs that have a report attached are already on the internet. The reason that the others were published originally, but when we changed the website, they were all taken off because we were looking at a new way of working. And at that time, EIAs were not published with the report. But because we've changed the process that they're actually published with the report, that cuts down on a lot of extra ones being put on. So it just means that when people see a report, they'll be able to get the EIA, but the ones, if it's just part of a service change that didn't go to committee, they'll still be able to look at the EIA.
Okay, thanks, Gina. Members? Anybody?
Only I can't quite square the 7 additional ones to something called additional EIAs. So I can see regulatory committee and full cabinet, but there are certain items here which say additional EIAs, and I apart from that, there shouldn't really be.
Yeah, 154, for instance, 203.
Yeah, 206, 208, 209, 212. What does that actually mean?
What it means is that it's not part of a committee report. So if we're doing a project of putting in a new crossing, it won't go to committee, it's part of a project. But what we will do is we will do a prelim EIA just to look at what we're doing, is it going to impact on any of the groups? So if we're not going to put the right Pelican crossing in, people, are going to, with visual impairment, are going to have issues. So that's why we put them as additional EIAs, because they're not attached to a report.
So if I can just carry on, then how would I identify the 7 items that required a full EIA in the appendix? Where would I find them? Look the same to me, I'm afraid. I haven't quite got to the top bit.
That's because we're not allowed to print in colour anymore, so it makes it difficult to understand.
okay, Ian? Members? Okay. Gina, thank you very much. And we know this report, yes? Thank you. I think I'll go for a 10-minute comfort break for some people. But can we reconvene at just before 22? Is that all right? Yeah. I know John wants to go to the loo. He told me that earlier. Okay, thank you, members. We'll reconvene. Can we go to item 4, please, which is the audit planning report? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. So this report sets out the work that we need to do to complete the audit for 2018-19. So it sets out the risks that we've identified in relation to the audit of the financial statements and our consideration around the value for money conclusion. It is a long report. There's a lot of information within it. It's information that we're required to share with you as those charged with governance for the council. But I was really just going to focus on page 25 of the papers, which is the overview of the strategy. And then David and I are happy to take any comments or questions. So the risks that we have identified are broadly similar to the risks that we identified for the council last year. The first one is an overarching risk which always sits within audits that we carry out, or that all audit firms would carry out, so that no matter how good your system of internal control, should someone want to do so, they can probably find a way of circumventing that, and therefore the international standards of auditing set out required procedures. So that's that first one. The second one is a more specific risk that we have identified. So when considering where management might be able to manipulate entries within the financial statements, the area that we have identified would potentially be through inappropriate capitalisation of revenue expenditure. So we're not saying that that is what is happening, that it is something that is actually happening, but that is where we think that risk of management override may occur. The valuation of land and buildings, and also investment property and PFI accounting, and indeed pension liability valuation, are all areas where we focus our attention, and you will have seen us carry out work and report on that in last year's audit results report. These are all areas where there's a significant element of management estimation or judgment, or the use of specialists by management to allow them to get to the values that are included within the financial statements. So they are sort of inherently a higher risk than, say, the debtors and creditors, for example. Over the page, on minimum revenue provision, we've identified that as another risk. So this is a charge to the general fund and the council tax financing requirements. It is a more complex calculation. We used our specialists last year to look at that, and the impact of that sort of falls within 18-19. So we include that, and we'll report back to you in our audit results report. And the final one is around the implementation of 2 new accounting standards. So IFRS 9, which is in relation to financial instruments and how they're disclosed in the financial statements, and IFRS 15, which is revenue from contracts with customers, are both new or changed requirements for this year. We don't expect those to have a material impact on the council necessarily, but we have asked council officers to consider whether there is an impact so that we can assess that, and we'll hopefully carry out that work as part of our interim. In terms of the value for money conclusion, this year we have not, so I'm turning to page 36 of the papers. We've carried out fairly detailed planning in relation to this, particularly looking at the medium-term financial plan of the council and other sort of requirements that are set out by the NAO. At this stage, we haven't identified any significant risks to the work that we need to carry out. So the risk is that we would give the wrong conclusion. So it's not necessarily saying there are no risks, but it's do we know enough about the arrangements that we can be able to issue a safe VFM conclusion, and at this stage we feel we do, but we will keep that under review as we continue through the audit. In terms of just the timing of the audit, so obviously members will recall that 2 years ago the audit opinion was delayed. Last year we achieved the new deadline of the 31st of July with the audit starting relatively late in the process. We're sort of discussing with officers for this year about the timing of that year-end audit and whether it would be better to bring it forward slightly or whether to leave it where it was because we achieved it last year. So we're keeping that bit under review. I think that's probably all I wanted to say in terms of introduction, unless I've forgotten anything, David. So happy to take any comments or questions, Chairman.
Okay. Any comments or questions on the points raised? It was a minute, Ian.
Thank you, Helen. And for giving us a report that's germane to Portsmouth, I'm always pleased to see that. You talked about the risk of fraud in revenue and expenditure recognition, which of course is a finance function. And presumably, if one were to be honest about it, the finance department is the most likely to be able to effect this kind of misstatement, I think, of something as capital as opposed to revenue. Do you have a policy of justification where they justify why they've done it? I.e., sort of, what is the balance of burden of proof? Do they have to prove that it is or it isn't, or do you make a decision that it isn't unless they've proven that it is?
So I think in the majority of cases it would be clear whether a transaction was capital or revenue in nature. Clearly that's not the case for absolutely everything. So we would in the first instance speak to officers to understand the rationale for why something had been capitalised, but we would use our own judgment ultimately to evaluate whether we agreed with that rationale or not, and look at whatever supporting evidence is available by way of, substantiating the position that the council's putting forward as to whether something is capital or revenue in nature.
Sorry, just to add, sort of having had a little bit of time to think, normally with, which is always why it's good to have two people, because one person can be thinking while I'm thinking, while you're asking. If you think, so normally if you are capitalising something, you would expect there to be an asset. So there will be a physical thing, and that's quite easy to verify.
Like housing,
for example. So where it becomes more difficult, maybe, for example, staff costs, where they can be capitalised. There are certain costs which sometimes can be capitalised, other times there may be reasons why they can't be.
So can I help you with an example? For example, we're developing Tipner land. We would need officer time required to do that, and we could effectively capitalise the officer costs in relation to the cost of developing Tipner land. Is that an example?
That would be an example, but there's quite clear guidance about what can be capitalised and what can't. So it does become, as David said, it is a judgment, but it's looking at the balance. It's looking at the evidence that was put forward and taking that judgment.
Then on page 33 of the pack, I think it's page 13 of yours, you talk about MRP, which is the minimum repayment. What is the repayment plan from borrowings, correct? I mean, I know that we can't compare year on year because we've actually changed the rules in Portsmouth as to how we do that. But is this also part of the 2% that DCLG, or whatever it's now called, says that we should be setting aside to pay back money that we owe? So we should be setting aside 2% per annum of the capital sum for a 50-year loan, for example. Is this what we're talking about?
Yeah. We aim to align the MRP to the life of the asset, and 50 years is the maximum period over which we provide over. For most assets, it's shorter.
So why are we doing it in the life of the asset rather than the life of the loan?
Well, there is no direct link between assets and loans. We have a number of assets financed by borrowing, and we have a pool of loans, and there's no direct link between the two. Aligning it to the life of assets is in line with the government's guidance, and also the period over which that expenditure provides benefits to the council.
I completely understand that. The next question is on page 14 of yours and 34. You said that you think that the new IFRS 15, it's not 15, it's 9, is likely to have little impact on us, but of course that covers everything we lease. So that covers, we lease cranes to MMD, so that will bring that into our accounts, won't it, which currently isn't the case, and that's quite a significant capital sum.
I think that's referring to IFRS 16, which is the new standard for leases, which was due to be implemented from 2019-20. And so our initial intention there would have been to understand what the council was planning to do with respect to that new standard, because you quite rightly say it has quite wide-ranging implications in terms of bringing things onto the balance sheet which wouldn't have been before, because of the getting rid of that distinction between operating and finance leases to a large extent. But that has now been deferred by government until at least 2021. So the implementation of that moves on another year down the line.
Pretty lucky. But what about the financial instruments? Are you saying that there aren't? we don't sort of deal in financial instruments that are off balance sheet ultimately that now have to come back onto it.
No, but with the financial instruments, I mean, relatively speaking, local authority financial instruments are straightforward unless you have a significant number of instruments that are sort of valued at the higher end of the scale. So you're looking at things like, the value of where your debt, accounts payable, accounts receivable, so debtors, creditors, sort of, and the standard transactions. So it can become more complex. It's more complex if an authority also has a pension fund, because they can be inherently more difficult to value, and there is a fair value assumption within there. But the fair value of the majority of local authority transactions is more straightforward. So we're not expecting out of the two standards that we have included, 9 and 15, 9 requires more thought than 15. More thought than 15. 15 is revenue from contracts with customers. Relatively speaking, again, that is less likely to be applicable to local authorities other than where they have subsidiary companies that may have revenue coming in. And that's something that would obviously need to be taken into account. But again, you're looking at materiality levels within that. So we don't expect it to be material, but it does need a paper to think about that.
Okay, so thank you. Then can I take you to page 67 of the pack, which I suspect you probably have in front of you, in which there is a footnote which looks pretty anodyne, but I read it 8 times and I still don't completely understand it. And I probably could read it 80 times, I won't understand it. Is this the kind of thing that we're talking about? It sounds as though I don't understand what's actually happened in this particular instance, but we seem to have borrowed money from Canada Life for them to obtain the head lease in respect of land at White Hart Road for a period of 41 years, which results in quarterly pass-through payments of £506,549, which presumably we're receiving from the Isle of Wight, from the White Link, and we're paying direct to Canada Life. Is that correct? Or am I asking you a question?
I'm sorry, I don't actually know where you're looking in the back of page.
It's page 87.
Oh, 87.
Sorry, not 86, it's 87. I apologise. Footnote, page 87.
I think that might be one.
If you recall, this is...
No, I know it's a pretty different report, but it is a financial instrument. So the question I was asking, I think
it'll be covered one way or the other, really.
I don't know what it is. That's the point. And since it's been raised as something in the new accounting function 9, I'm wondering whether this is actually something that currently isn't on our balance sheet.
You can do it if you want.
Yes, it would be a financial instrument, because wherever we're owed or we owe money, that is a financial instrument. So yes, both the leases referred to would be financial instruments.
Sorry, are they currently off the balance sheet? I.e., will this new rule have an impact on our balance sheet to put £72,999,800 somewhere where it wasn't before?
No, they're already on our balance sheet.
That's lucky. Related parties. related parties, page 55. Required communications. I've put a note here of the usual MMD. Would that cover, for example, the EU asking whether there was state aid, or does that cover where we think that transactions that have come up in internal audit reports need to be investigated by the external auditor?
That wouldn't. So MMD would count as a related party and be considered within that. I think if the EU investigation around state aid is, we would probably consider under consideration of laws and regulations over the page on page 56. So there we say we would.
Although you also have non-compliance with laws and regulations in that related parties at point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Yes.
I mentioned that.
So it's probably both. It's a moot point, but I suspect we would pick it up under the laws and regulations rather than the related parties side, although it would impact on both. I'm sorry, I've now forgotten. So you mentioned two, the state aid.
The internal audit report is quite damning of various things that seem to have been happening and complaints made regularly about what happens inside MMD. Do you pick that up from internal audit?
So we review the work that is done by internal audit, and we would pick that up and we consider that in terms of our consideration of entity level controls, so how good your system of internal control is. That in turn would then drive our assessment of how much testing we might need to do, so in how we set our materiality and how we set our testing thresholds. If issues have already been identified by internal audit, reported, and appropriate action is being taken, it's unusual then for us to sort of come back and sort of have another go, bite at the cherry at that one, unless we felt there was something that was significant to our responsibilities that we needed to flag. The alternative would be if we didn't feel that appropriate action was being taken in response to internal audit findings.
But you apply the whole council number of 10.87 million, whatever it is that you've decided is the amount that can be under a radar before it actually hits. In which case, presumably, because MMD, that's probably 2/3 of its turnover, if not more, if not totally, then it doesn't qualify. But it is a related party. It has a different amount of. It's elementally different from the council. But are you applying the same criteria to a related party that you do to the whole council in terms of what you report?
So you mentioned the figure of 10.5 million. That's our total materiality level, our testing materiality, the performance materiality number. So this is on page 27 is 7.8 million. So we look at significant accounts, significant transactions that are effectively above 7.8 million. MMD's number varies, but each year we consider whether or not the office's assessment of whether MMD should be accounted for as a group within the Portsmouth financial statements. Sort of as things have stood up until the previous year of audit, and then I assume the current year, office's assessment is that MMD is not either qualitatively or quantitatively material to be separated out, and that group accounts are being prepared. That's something we review each time. In terms of related...
Do you make the decision, or do they make the decision?
Officers make the decision and we review the decision. If we disagreed with the decision, then there is a long discussion usually about what happens next. But ultimately, we could, if we felt that the decision was the wrong one, it could go down all of the routes up to and ultimately ending in a qualification of the financial statements if we fundamentally disagree. I would doubt that would happen.
And we can't, as governance audit standards, make an opinion that you might listen to about it.
You could certainly include, through your comments, that we take into account your comments at committee, but again, each year we need to look at both the qualitative and the quantitative. Just in response to specifically on related party transactions, if you look at page 38, which is the more detailed information on materiality, we set a lower threshold for related party transactions. So because they are disclosed to within 1,000, we tend to expect that the related party note, because that is of interest to members of the public or other stakeholders, that would be expected to be more accurate than at other accounts.
I can't see what it says. It's page 38, did you say?
Page 38, which is the materiality side. Yeah. If you look on the right-hand side, at the bottom, sort of the last paragraph refers to specific materiality.
Yes.
And we say we have also set materiality of 1,000 for remuneration disclosures, related party transactions, members' allowance and exit packages.
So do we say that the materiality of £1,000 goes to everything to do with MMD, for example?
No, we're talking about the related party note at that point.
Thank you, and you keep forgetting to put your microphone on, don't you? Well, it's for the streaming. Could I ask one question? Page 33, and it's the pension fund deficit. As reported at March of last year, 386 million. Should we, as a committee and as a council, be worried about that?
I think it's a fair question. I think the answer is not as such. All or the vast majority of local government pension schemes are in deficit to some degree. At the last round of triennial valuations, that picture improved largely for most funds in terms of the percentage to which they were fully funded. The purpose of the triennial valuation undertaken every 3 years by the actuary is to set contribution rates for the bodies to pay, with an aim to returning the funds to a fully funded position, usually over a sort of 15 to 20 year period. So the fact that you have a pension liability on your balance sheet is not in any way unusual. And as I say, there are mechanisms set up in the way that the local government pension scheme works, which are geared towards returning them to a fully funded position. The other thing is that liability would only ever crystallise, let's say, if there were no more active members within the fund, or the fund were discontinued for some reason. And I think either of those is highly unlikely.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just also add, it also has something to do with interest rates. If interest rates are 0.75 or 0.5, then you need an awful lot of capital to fund the obligations of a pension fund. Assuming interest rates will eventually get back to sort of 3-4%, it will make a big difference to whether or not a pension fund is underfunded or overfunded. Is that correct?
I think that's probably a fair point. No, there are a lot of factors that the actuary has to take into account in estimating the value of assets and liabilities of the fund at any point in time. But you're quite right that those do fluctuate and that can impact. But as I say, that's what I suppose is part and parcel of why they revisit it every 3 years and reset the contribution rates on that basis, so that they're regularly taking into account changes in the factors that influence the fund value. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, John.
Thanks, Chair. I make no apology for mentioning Brexit in this meeting. I suspect we'd go through the meeting if I didn't without talking about it, even though we've got 57 days to go and still haven't got a clue what is going to happen. And the report just alludes to it, I suppose. Talks about in 2018-19, this has included consideration of the steps taken by Portsmouth City Council to consider the impact of Brexit. It's page 16 of Helen's report. So, has included consideration of the steps taken by Portsmouth City Council to consider the impact of Brexit on its future service provision, medium-term financing and investment values. I suppose the question is, consideration of what? What are we basing our your consideration on? Because clearly there are people, Messrs Johnson and Gove, who say we're going to have an economic nirvana and we're going to be awash with extra money to spend on stuff. So and there may well be people on this panel that feel similarly. Or is it on the Governor of the Bank of England, who talks about a 35% fall in property values in the event of no deal, which clearly I would expect to have an impact on us in terms of the property investment portfolio that we have, if that was to be the case. So when you say consideration, what are you considering?
So my crystal ball is no better than anybody else's crystal ball. I guess that, and as a firm, we would say the same thing. The areas where the areas that we think that need to be considered are within your medium-term financial planning. Are you modelling different outcomes? So either the Governor of the Bank of England scenario or the more positive scenarios being put forward about operating outside of the EU. So within that, I think anyone who is modelling on that nothing much is happening in the outside world is probably doing what a lot of other people are probably doing, which is kind of just switching off a little bit. So we would expect you to be actively considering what the implications may be. Other implications that need to take into account is how much external borrowing do you have? What's the interest rate on that? How long are those interest rates fixed? Could that be impacted by sudden increases potentially in borrowing rates? So if there are, I'm sure you will have read in the national press, councils that have taken out an extensive amount of borrowing to invest elsewhere. A lot of that is at short-term rates. What happens if at the end of those short-term rates that your long-term rates have suddenly rocketed? So have you thought about the cost of borrowing? Have you thought about the cost of, or the impact that there may be on the valuations? If you mentioned investment property, again, those councils that have perhaps borrowed and invested very heavily in investment property, particularly retail or industrial, have they thought about what might happen if they don't get those returns that they were expecting, and what impact might that then have on future service provision? So it's thinking about what sort of modelling and thinking is going on within each council, and it will be different for each council in terms of what they are doing. So that's kind of it. But again, none of us know. We may get to the 30th of March and it'll all be perfectly fine. We may not. It's a bit somewhat unclear, shall I say, at the moment. But those are probably the key sort of considerations that you would have. It's very much looking at your portfolios. Again, for pension funds, a particular issue for us as auditors of pension funds is that in general, asset valuations are carried out at the 31st of December and an estimate is made through until the 31st of March. It's anyone's guess what the 31st of March numbers might look like this year. So, and then what happens between the 31st of March and the date we issue the opinion. So then you've got post-balance sheet events. So there's various different scenarios that could play out. Equally, things may continue as normal.
Okay, John.
Just a follow-up point, I suppose, that because the second part of the statement there on Brexit says also the precise impact cannot yet be modelled, which I think Helen was saying there. We anticipate that councils will be carrying out scenario planning, and that Brexit and its impact will feature on operational risk registers. And in the performance report, I was just looking at the Port Health one, which talks about, in the event of day one of no deal, the government has accepted that the border will be less than optimal, which doesn't give you any reassurance in terms of how much planning is being done on this. And I don't know, I suppose we can talk about it in the performance report, how much planning is going on, how are we assessing the risks, not least of a no-deal Brexit?
Yeah, perhaps if I can, excuse me, give a little bit of reassurance on that. I mean, it may not come through in the performance report, I think, due to the sort of retrospective nature of it, but there certainly is a lot of planning going on through the mechanisms of the local resilience forum around the possible implications of a no-deal Brexit. I'm not personally sort of close to that, but I'm aware from colleagues that there is an awful lot of planning going on that front.
Okay, can we note item 4 then? Is that okay? Thank you. Yeah, yes, for information. Okay. Item 5, just before we go, Councillor Neil Young has told me he's got to leave around about 12:30. Okay, so you may disappear in the middle of a report, that's all, that's fine. Thank you, Neil.
In actual fact, I'm going to hand you over to Paul. Paul's going to lead. Yes.
Okay, this is our standard performance update report, so I'll just take you through some of the key points and then happy to take any questions. So you'll see in the summary that we are at 72% complete or in progress, which is a place we are happy with. We are on course to complete the audit plan. I'll then take you on to it's page 4 in our report, 5.4. Here is an update on MMD audits planned and results, which was requested at the last committee. So that's the update there. As you'll see that we've got a few issued, a few in field work, and a couple, well, one to start and one that's been moved on.
Just on that, do you mean February 19 is expected reporting or not?
No, sorry, that's been moved to the following year's plan, so no, that's incorrect. We can change that.
No, just because I questioned that.
No, that's fine. You'll see also below that we've made a few amendments to the audit plan. Happy to take any questions on those, but I wasn't proposing to go through those in detail with you. So moving on, you'll see the graph relating to the exceptions that have been raised. Again, happy to take any questions later on regarding those. And then if I draw your attention to 6.1, this is where we're bringing to your attention the no assurance audit, the follow-up on a no assurance audit, and the follow-up on the IT no assurance audit. You'll see that we've put a separate appendices on that one, which is Appendix B. These are copies of the executive summaries that have gone out in the audit reports, which gives you a bit more detail on the MMD Gibson Hospitality no assurance audit. And again, the follow-up to the MMD procurement audit, and lastly, the IT inventory and disposal audit, which was brought to your attention a while back. The follow-up's been conducted, and those are the results. We've given you the full summary there to hopefully give you a bit more detail, but again, happy to take any questions. That's all I propose to go through on the report, but obviously happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you for that, thank you. Any questions?
Do you have any questions?
No, I have none.
Oh.
Ian, yes?
Sorry. Yes, can I just go through them one by one, please? First one was that date, but I assumed. Page 6 of your report, 64 of ours, bullet point 4. It says the following 11 areas are ongoing areas of work carried out by the internal audit. The financial rules waivers, I'm assuming that's for procurement, is it?
No, not necessarily. Financial rules are obviously in place to guide and direct, but there may be genuine reason why a particular rule we need to have, or not bypass, but have other arrangements in place. Yeah, potentially, yes. So, for example, making a payment in advance is a requirement that we're not allowed to make them, but sometimes there's genuine reason. Now, the process that we have involved is people cannot just circumvent any of the rules without getting a waiver, and the process that we have is it will initially come to internal audit to assess the risks and the controls that are around why they're not going down the prescribed path, and then it will either go to Mr. Pike or Mr. Ward following our opinion as to whether we think it is reasonable to take that path or not, and then the final decision is Mr. Pike or Mr. Ward. So it will go wider. It will be any of the rules.
Fine. What we don't see is anything that actually sets that out. We just know that it happens. So I mean, if someone were to ask me what is the quantum and the frequency of our financial rules waivers, I couldn't possibly tell anybody. And whether I should be allowed to or should be entitled to know is another matter. But it's at the moment we have no visibility, we have no sight of what we're talking about.
No, that's because you're placing reliance on your professionals in-house to determine whether, under those particular circumstances, it is relevant or not. We have in place something like 100 odd instances, and it may be that it is one-off, or it may be that a particular service cannot abide by a particular rule for an area of activity, and in which case we will have the waiver in place for a given period of time. You could request the information, Councillor. That is quite detailed, and I don't know how detailed you want to go with the information that's presented.
It's just interesting to know whether we're talking 2% of the total spend of the council or 0.004.
It is not measured in that way, because it may well be that it is simply a one-off payment that is being requested.
Could I also add, these waivers are very few and far between. I don't recall any being approved for the current financial year, but you could put me right. And any requests for financial waivers that do come forward, they are very closely looked at, and we normally find it an alternative process that enables them to comply with financial rules.
I mean, I just had seen it and I wasn't quite clear about what it meant, so thank you for that.
It's included because it is a function that we carry out, because that's the prescribed route that we had agreed with Section 151. So it is part and parcel of some of our activities, and sometimes we'll get queries and then there's no waiver in place because, as Jules has indicated, we've come up with not an alternative, but an alternative method, I suppose, for a still abiding. Yes. Not a workaround. I wouldn't like an auditor to use that tone.
Circumvention, but working within the rules, but having a way of doing it, because I'm sure Michael Lord's office is always open to that kind of looking at the rules. Then on page 2 of your, well, whatever it is, page 70, thank you for that. I must probably get the reputation of being an MMD basher. I'm not really, but this final paragraph amazes me. Not, in fact, that these things are happening, but that I've never heard that there have been, that Audit has, over the years, investigated numerous allegations of bribery against MMD staff. Numerous. Well, numerous can mean one or two, obviously, but are we talking lots and lots? But it has never come to the attention of this committee that this kind of these allegations have been put, apart from, and this is the first, John, you've been on this committee a long time, have you ever seen a paragraph about MMD to that extent before? Never. So I'm wondering what else we don't know until it sort of just gets put into a report and we suddenly discover that actually it is as whiffy as I've been thinking it is, but without knowing precisely why. And then suddenly we get to hear it, that you have, over the years, investigated numerous allegations of bribery against MMD staff. It's an astonishing thing to say in a public report. Quite astonishing. It's also astonishing that we didn't know about it. We have no quantum. We have no understanding of actually what the elements involved are. And we are the Governance Audit Standards Committee. I just cannot believe that it's just been slipped in this way. I mean, clearly it's part of the report and you're right to do it, but it's absolutely amazing that the thing that we've all been worrying about and thinking there's something wrong with this organisation, here we have it in black and white that there are people within the organisation who absolutely agree. So, is there anything that you can tell us that will give us some comfort that in fact it isn't the Barbary Coast on the Solent, effectively?
And can I give you that assurance now? And I appreciate, in actual fact, having something like this in the report sets a particular scene. Historically, and I'm talking a number of years, we had a flurry of allegations in relation to staff down there, and it's very easy to make allegations. Yeah. They would have filtered through under either whistleblowing, but when we do a preliminary, if you can't establish or you can easily refute, then we will draw a line at quite an easy stage. When we have historically reported to you, it may have been not lost but diluted in the dialogue around we've had whistleblowing and we may have made it explicit that it was MMD. I know from recollection we have not had a whistleblowing in this area for at least 3 years, if not longer, and I will double check the last time we had one in relation to gifts and hospitality. It was included in this report because it was the report that went to the directors at MMD, highlighting the fact that they were aware historically of some of the issues and they were aware of the vulnerability with not having a transparent process. So I'll be very mindful what I include in future.
Please be as honest as
Well,
that's fantastic. It's lovely to read it.
I
got really happy.
But I do want to give assurances that, and I will double check, I do not think we've had anything for 3 to 4 years. Anything that we would have had which amounted to anything or did not would have filtered through either on which areas we've investigated or as part of the whistleblowing report that is submitted. But it was a number of years ago.
Right. So then the next is on page 3 of your report, so page 71. Who set the level in your follow-up testing, a requirement to seek comparative quotes for procurements over £30,000? Now, I don't know, I don't know, but I suspect that the limit of MMD's turnover is 12 million. I don't know whether it's more or less. I don't know. But let's take that 12 million and then take that right down to what 30,000 represents of it, compared to our limit at the moment here with directors' procurement of 100,000 on 110 million discretionary spend and 554 million total spend. There is a pretty big difference in percentage terms of what the company's revenue can be spent without recourse to comparative quotes and various things. And I think that that's quite a lot, £30,000. But I don't know what they're buying, and therefore I'm not sure whether I'm right to think it's a lot. But in quantitative terms, it would seem to me, and I run a number of companies, and I have never allowed anybody to make a unilateral payment of more than £5,000, and certainly nowhere near 30. So I don't know why we've gone to a level that high. Maybe because we have a background in the council of having so much, I mean, a huge amount of money, and therefore lots and lots of discretion required. But it worries me. 30,000 seems a lot for not to have comparative quotes. But I'm just making the point there. I'm sure it's a matter of their policy, not ours. It's not our policy, but it's the board, I should imagine. And then I've got page 76. Ah, yes. It isn't MOD, it's IT. Paragraph 1, 2, 3. Let me just read out. The possibility of having security etchings added to high-value items was explored. However, the cost per item for the security measure is £6. It has, I'm assuming, been agreed by the service that etching was not cost-effective. It probably cost £6 to deliver the thing. £6 on a £1,000 laptop does not seem to me to be an uncost-effective way of ensuring that it is tagged as our property. And I would prefer to go further, to have some software inside it which tells us where the thing is at any one time when it's been switched on, which actually is quite a good way of getting our personnel records in available to us to know who's actually working when. I mean, that's Big Brother-ish, I know, but £6 really is too much to find out where a laptop is at £1,000 a shot. I mean, you make the judgment, or you say that that's what they've decided, but you tell us, you don't say whether you agree that £6 is asking too much.
I don't think it's for us to say. I think it's for the organisation and the relevant managers to manage the risks that are associated within those areas.
But bear in mind, we've just come out of a review where we discovered that there were items of high value that were missing, and we couldn't find them, didn't know where they were. I mean, we found some of them, but we didn't find all of them. So you've just done an internal audit on precisely this matter, where you've told them that you're not entirely satisfied with their procedure. They come up and say, well, we could have etching, cost £6, we don't think it's worth it. It doesn't really square.
But etchings equally won't necessarily stop items from going missing.
Well, precisely what I say, spend £12 on a tiny bit of software that tells them where the thing is, which is actually what I'd much prefer to do, but I think there may be some unite or unison people saying that we shouldn't know where our employers actually are during working hours. Apparently we're not supposed to know that kind of thing. It seems to be a sensible thing.
Sorry, I think what we're trying to say is that the financial rules say that we need to security mark assets. What we're saying is that we're not saying the risk is gone, we're saying that this is what they've decided and that is a business decision. We still believe the risk is there. That's why the levels of assurance haven't moved. We're just saying that that was the response that we received to the question.
Okay, I'm sorry. So, Chairman, the point I'm trying to make is you're the internal auditors, and as I understand it, through the city solicitor, you make recommendations, and they are taken up or not, but the individual manager or director can say, actually, we don't consider this a commercial risk enough, we'll take it on the chin. Well, what is the sanction if we do lose 300 top laptops because we haven't etched them?
Councillor Lime, we have moved away from making recommendations.
Have we?
Internal audit has, for a number of years, and the rationale behind that is if we dictate to a service what we believe they ought to do, they know and understand their service far better. And if they come up with a solution, they are more inclined to implement what they've come up with as opposed to us saying. Now, if we had a real issue, we would escalate and we wouldn't be very happy. But 9 times out of 10, we need to let the organisation. That's why we feed into the corporate governance group, and that's why we also have a close liaison, obviously, with Section 151. So if there are occasions where we're very animated about certain things because we think the exposure is just too big, but on a number of other issues, we will leave it to the organisation to determine.
And we won't know difference because we won't actually know. That in this report
You would if we were very passionate about the organisation and not taking this seriously. They're not taking sufficient steps. And it is about, is there reasonable action taken that mitigates the risk to a certain level? Now, if we think that risk exposure is just too great, we will escalate internally, but we'll also be escalating to the external auditors.
But in that case, can I just ask
And we may come to you as well to say, look, they're not doing anything, these are not doing anything.
Going back to that paragraph, then, would it make sense to have written, it was agreed between internal auditors and the service that etching was not cost effective?
It's not for us to agree, though. We have this quite often with pockets within the organisation where they say, are you happy to approve? And we say, there is a misunderstanding. It is not for us to approve or otherwise, it is for you to manage. Now, if we think there is a fundamental issue, that is where we will step in and we say, we're not happy. But ultimately, we can't make anybody do anything.
Well, okay, in that case, from our point of view, because we don't know what goes on inside the departments and the heads and your heads and talking to them,
Yep.
it helps us to know that you're not unhappy with this. Even if I think it's odd, and I'm just a councillor, if you just said something like,
Yeah. Equally, Councillor, I do not want to hang my service on every time we say we think you've taken reasonable steps, because services will hang us quite quickly if we've given any indication we were remotely happy with what was put in place. And it's not for us to be happy or otherwise, it's for us to have an opinion and take it into the arena that is relevant.
Yeah, sorry, if I could just make, I've just gone back and checked an email, actually. It's interesting because this sort of plays into the last financial rules item as well. This is the last thing where we discussed a change to the financial rules, because there was an application to change the financial rules regarding etching, and we resisted it. An email I have from Mr. Povey where we were saying, what's the quantum of the potential loss? His reply is that as a result of etching, he estimates there would be potentially a £67,000 loss of resale income as a result of the etching of selling old equipment, and he compared that against what he's estimated to be a £600 loss per annum as a result of a stolen laptop. So he was saying he's lost one laptop through it being, one laptop has been stolen. There's been more numbers lost, obviously, but he's saying there was one laptop stolen, and that's set against the 67,000 loss on it.
That's a perfectly good business case, but it's not presented in this paragraph in those terms. It just says to me when I read it that we decided as a council it wasn't worth spending £6 to save £1,000. But actually what you're saying is that the etching was not cost effective in terms of on sale, and all we had to do is write something like that, and I'm not going to get aerated about it. I mean, that's the point. I just say, I look at what I read, and I think, is that reasonable? I can't second guess what your procedures are within the council, because all I have in front of me is what I read. That's all I've got, and it's a hell of a long read, and I can tell you it takes a long time, and it's very, very onerous to do.
And Councillor Lyme, with that in mind, I don't want to write War and Peace and tie everybody up in knots. I'm happy to take the question from you in committee and then clarify. And in relation to your other question regarding the board and the 30,000, you were right, it is down to the board.
Governance and Audit asked them to revisit that particular figure, because actually I think it's, given what our misgivings about the whole business anyway, I think it's red rag to the bull. So can somebody do that?
Okay, thank you very much. Can we then note, what was it? Item 5. Okay. Item 6, the Treasury Management Monitoring Report for the third quarter of 2018-19 from page 79.
The report provides some assurance that there have been no breaches to the Treasury Management Policy, and that we have operated within the Treasury Management indicators agreed by the Council. The report has been expanded in order to try and answer some issues which were raised at City Council. In terms of our activity, we've undertaken no new borrowing this financial year, and at the 31st of December we had £384 invested at an average rate of 1.11%. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, thank you. Could I just ask one question? And I know it's come up before, but page 88, unrated building societies. There's quite a chunk there in the chart about unrated building societies. Is there a big risk using them as opposed to the rated building societies mentioned above, Michael? Why do we use unrated? Sorry, why do we use it? It's because there must be a massive risk there.
The position with building societies is that the larger ones tend to be rated, the smaller ones tend to be unrated. It is generally the case that the unrated ones are actually more conservatively or prudently managed than the rated ones. We do look at the data related to unrating building societies before we invest. I would say that generally speaking, at the time we look at the data, the unrated are probably more prudently managed than the rated ones, but there is also the case that with the rated ones, the credit rating agencies monitor them, which you don't get with the smaller ones. It is also the case that our investment limits are smaller for the unrated building societies.
Is there a better return then from the unrated ones?
Generally, there is.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. John?
Thanks, Chair. Just returning to an earlier point that I made in respect to the property investment portfolio, and there is, there is helpful, page 90, is helpful, A7, there's a description there in terms of how it works and maybe some of the protection to guard against financial shocks. But given what we were discussing earlier, if there was a fall in property prices of 35%, as quoted by the Governor of the Bank of England, then are we sufficiently guarded in terms of that financial shock with what looks like a relatively low reserve of just over £2 million?
I mean, in terms of the investment property portfolio, in terms of a fall in value, it would mean that we would have to set aside additional funds in order to repay the debt on that property, because we'd have to provide for shortfall out of revenue rather than relying on the capital receipt when we dispose of it. I mean, in terms of revenue, we'd only really suffer a significant revenue loss if the tenant went out of business and we couldn't find another tenant.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. Yeah. Thank you. Ian?
Thank you, Chairman. No one's expert, nobody knows what's going on. So if I can go to the page 83 of the report, of the pack, and if you would indulge me by making the first graph A and the second graph B, and on the next page, well, when I say graph, whatever it is, table, and the next on page 84 C, and then D, and then E. If you could just enumerate them, C, A, B, C, D, and E, because at the moment they're not Fig 1, Fig 2 or anything, because I'm going to refer to all of them. So what I had asked, as you may recall, in full council, was transparency where possible. And from the GA&S point of view, I think it would be very interesting to know what the average interest rate is in each of the columns in B. When we talk about the actual proportion of loans maturing, I would like to know how much they are costing us, because actually that's what we're here for. And what, again, under B and C, which are the fixed rate borrowings, you have a variable and fixed rate on B, variable on C, but it doesn't actually say what the percentage of the borrowing is fixed and what percentage is variable. We have net fixed and net variable, but that is not actually what I'm asking for, which in E, you say the fixed interest net borrowing and the variable interest net lending. That doesn't help at all, because it gives us no idea of actually what the costs are. It just tells us how much money we are borrowing and how much we're lending, as it were, and we don't get a view. I just want to be able to look at this as I would in a board meeting and find out what we've got, where we've got it, and how much it is, and what it's costing us in each of the periods, so that I know that, for example, if you take C, our variable borrowing at 6 to 10 years at 12% apparently of the loans is going to cost us 17% of the interest we pay. So we actually know the differential between how much it actually is costing us and how much the loan, the percentage of the loan is. So then if I go to 85, page 85, and it talks early redemption of borrowing, in the first sentence it says, with the exception of 2 loans, all the council's borrowings to finance capital expenditure are fixed rate and fixed term loans. Fine. Go back to C, which is the top table on page 84, and it says the maturity structure of the council's variable rate borrowing was 2%, 2%, 7%, 12%, 25%, 27%. That doesn't represent 2 loans. I mean, in order for us to have 2 loans on variable, unless I've got it wrong, in order for us to have 2 loans which are at a variable rate, only 2 loans at variable rate, how can we have, and let's assume that we're doing from 5 onwards, 6 years onwards, we've got 12% in 6 to 10 years, 25% 11 to 20, 27% in 21 to 30, and 25% in 31 to 40. That cannot just be 2 loans, and it cannot just be short-term borrowing. So I don't understand how you reconcile that sentence with what happens in the table. And I go on to F and G, which is the next page, on overall interest on borrowing. And the first table, which I'll call F, it says borrowings, interest paid in year to date at the 30th of September 2018 is 9.4 million. Overall position 12.7 million. And yet 3 months later, at G, the one below, the borrowings interest paid to date is 14 million, which is, by my reckoning, 1.5 times-ish. So it's 50% increase in 3 months. And the overall position is a 50% increase, more or less, on September 2018, and yet we've actually reduced our borrowings in that period. So the reason I find the Treasury Management Report so difficult is I just can't make sense of the figures. It may be that we pay all our interest at the end of the year. I don't know. But it doesn't help us to know, just to have the figures and say, oh, well, that's what it means, because I don't understand it. And I think I'm intelligent enough to be able to understand, maybe not responsible enough to be given all the information you should be giving me, but I certainly am intelligent enough to be able to read it and to draw the inferences from it as to what we are borrowing, how much it's costing us, what our net borrowing cost is, because then on page 87, where we've just talked earlier about the 0.65%, the financial instrument, which is the Canada Life thing, which I'd never heard of before, and I don't know whether John, who's been on the... Yes. You've heard about it. Well, it was probably when I wasn't on the committee, but I don't quite understand that. But you talk about the carry cost, in the cost of carry, in paragraph 2 on 87, and you say it's calculated as being the difference between the weighted interest payable by the council on the 2016-17 borrowing and the average return being achieved from the investment of surplus cash arising from the overborrowing, i.e. 1.62% less 1.11%. But I don't quite understand that. I don't know what that means. In effect, the carry cost is 0.51% of the total amount that we're overborrowed, which means it's costing the council £800,000 per year to be overborrowed. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, but it would be nice not to have to take the calculator out to find out what we're actually talking about when we talk about Treasury Management Report. All I'm saying is I am still in the dark about what we are borrowing, what it's costing us in the tranches that you tell us the percentage of the loans are and when they're being repaid, but you don't tell us what the interest rate is at that time. So, maybe you think we're going to be too shocked that it's going to be 8% or something in years 6 to 10 and average 2% in 40 to 50. I don't know, but it doesn't give me a view of what we're borrowing, what we're investing or putting on deposit, and how it actually works. And then page 89. Fine, I know there's a lot of questions for you, but in the source of surplus cash invested in accordance with the Treasury Management Policy, we have that wonderful word that can cover so many things. At the bottom of the list, it says other. And other represents 10% of our invested cash. But it's obviously not important enough to tell us what that actually is. And I don't understand why we don't get to hear about this. We've got other in our expenditure and financial statements, and we will have that presumably in the budget thing this afternoon. And other covers a multitude of sins. but we don't get to see what it is. I think that is my final part of the rant about this, but do you see what I mean? I don't understand the report. It doesn't tell me what I want to know, and ultimately, I think that it's trying not to tell me things that it doesn't want me to know.
I can honestly say that it is a complex area, but we do our best to try and tell you what you want to know. I mean, maybe we don't succeed all the time, but we certainly do our best to try and explain it.
So do you see why it's useful to know what our average interest rate is in the periods that you've got when we're dealing with the maturity structure of the current fixed rate borrowing? It sounds like we're doing very well because more than 50% of it is in 31 to 50 years, which is good, obviously, unless everything goes to handcart and Brexit lasts that long, which of course, in your opinion, you think it will happen. But let's assume, for the sake of argument, it doesn't. But what I'm asking about is how do we get to the nub, the meat of the information, which is that, for example, 11 to 20 years, we've got 24% of our debt, but 21 to 30 years, we've only got 7%. And if memory serves me correctly, 21 to 30 years, are the interest rates that were being charged were somewhat higher than those between 11 to 20 years. So interestingly, we've got a lot of debt at a higher rate, probably, but I don't know.
The amount of interest we pay is partly a product of the term of a loan, and it's also partly a product of when we took the loan out. And in terms of answering your question of the interest rates appending to those loan periods, I'm happy to provide that information, and as ever it's trying to strike the balance, but to try and give you the right amount of information, the information you want, and not so much that you can't see the wood for the trees.
No, thank you. I mean, all I'd say, I think if we had a calculator, we can actually work out that you said that 1%, take figure B, for example, on page 83, you've got that table which says what our fixed rate borrowing was, and we can actually, at a particular date, and if you just said the average interest rate in under 1 year was, and 1 to 2 years was, and 3 to 5 years, you can presumably work that out, and we can work that out as well, because we know what the total borrowing is, and I think we do, because it's, am I right in thinking that the actual borrowing is 620 million? That's in A.
That is our total debt. The actual total borrowings are 554 million, and then it's paragraph A3 in the table.
A3 in the table?
Yeah, under overall interest on borrowing. So we've got £554 million of conventional borrowings, £1 million of borrowing through finance leases, and £65 million of borrowing through private finance initiative schemes, which make up the 620 million.
And they're very expensive, those two, aren't they?
Yes.
Councillor Ann, can I ask you to switch on your microphone, because I've had a complaint that people can't hear you.
Well, they're very lucky then. Okay, thank you. Fine. That it would just be helpful to have the schedules, not just when we repay them, but actually. So if we know that it's 1%ish, and it does add up to 100%, does it? In the table, I imagine it does, or near enough to make no difference. But it is useful because we also are aware. So, for example, when I was talking about the question of whether or not our carry was £800,000 per annum. That is what it's costing us to have over-borrowed. I mean, and I'm not saying we shouldn't have done it. I'm just saying that we actually need to know what it cost us to do it, rather than sort of the average rates. It's the way we can say, yeah, we think that's good or we think it's bad. Thank you very much. Did you have any views on what other is on page 89? The 41 million.
Other is principally the money we set aside to repay debt under the MRP policy.
And it just stays there. And does that mean next year it's going to be 2% bigger? No, it's going to be 2% greater than it's going to be 10 million more.
Not necessarily, because all the time we're making MRP, which increases it, but we're also repaying principal, which reduces it.
Okay, so for example, we paid back £2 million between September and December. So that would come out, or what you're saying is that would come out of the other?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Okay, can we then, is that okay, John, you okay? Thank you. Can we then, item 6, Treasury Management Monitoring, we recommended that be noted there are no breaches of the Treasury Management Policy of last year up to December, and that the actual Treasury Management indicators as at 31st December are set out in Appendix A. Is that agreed? Or
I
noted?
just also have a note that we are going to do what I've asked in terms of future reporting of average interest rates on in those columns.
Yeah, fair point, yeah. Okay, thank you. Last item, which is item 7, Performance Management Update for the second quarter of 18-19. John?
Okay, thank you, Chairman. So mindful of how long people have been sitting here, I will keep it as brief as I can. Firstly, apologies from Kelly Nash, who would normally be presenting us. She's unfortunately at a portfolio briefing at the moment, so couldn't attend. I mean, in terms of the report itself, obviously it does follow the format that members will be reasonably familiar with, which is essentially contains a summary from each director, followed by a more detailed report from each service area, and then some details around projects and risks. The key themes emerging from that reporting are as listed in section 3.5 down to 3.8 of the report, which are actually A, not particularly surprising, and B, not particularly changed since last time, which I think predominantly are around sort of increased service demands, reducing capacity and ever reducing amounts of availability of funding to provide services. So obviously, I mean, that's sort of a bit of a stating the obvious in a way, but the detail supporting that is in the reports. As always, I will happily try and sort of field as many questions as I can that members may have, and anything I can't answer, obviously I'm happy to take away and get written answers to, or if members would prefer, if you have a lot of questions, it might be easier to sort of submit those in a format that I can go through and then provide answers to avoid sort of dwelling on them too much in today's meeting. Just a quick note about future reporting, because obviously I'm acutely aware, as is Kelly, that this report does get sort of bigger and bigger, and sort of by virtue of its size and content less and less sort of usable and helpful in a way. So our proposal for future, as set out in section 4 of the report, is that actually for the remainder of this financial year we'll sort of stick to this format, but then for starting in the new financial year come back with something actually far more streamlined, and rather than sort of having directorate by directorate statements, we'll actually provide some information that allows the committee to gain some assurance about whether the council's actually delivering on its priorities. And by doing that, I think sort of with great respect to members, perhaps sort of focus sort of attention into to what is actually the committee's remit, which is to gain an overall level of assurance around the council's performance, and isn't sort of duplicating on what might be the roles of other sort of forums and officers around actually the sort of individual performance management of directors and service departments, etc. And of course try and do away with some of the duplications that we have between this committee and portfolios, this committee and employment committee as such. So obviously I would happily sort of take any members' comments and views on that proposal, but I would just like to reassure members that we are acutely aware of this sort of need to balance, have given you enough detail for you to be able to make informed sort of judgments whilst not overloading you with so much that it's effectively unworkable.
Thank you very much for that, John. You're absolutely right. We're sitting here with a report of 245 pages, which is a lot for anybody, including officers as well, I have to say. And that's why I'd be happy to look at a streamlined report. But as I say, I think maybe a meeting of this committee with a new regime in place after May of this year, which I think is what's been suggested anyway. But rather than have a report come to the first one, to actually have a meeting of JNS just to show what the format would be and whatever, and whether members would feel that there's enough information on that. And I think just and maybe tie that in with a training exercise of some sort that we've done in the past. Haven't done any lately, have we? Training. But, you know, whatever, okay. But we have this report in front of us, as you rightly say, John, and I'll pass it over to members.
Thanks, Chair. I do feel in part responsible for the the information, or what seems like an excess of information we have here, because I can think back to a number of years ago when we were getting performance reports, and I always cite the example of adult social care when it came back with one paragraph saying everything was okay,
yeah.
You know, so,
And they were losing money.
you know, so it's sort of grown from that, and I've always taken the perspective as well about that there's a lot of information in here that is good from a public perspective, seeing what the council is doing and how it is performing and where the pressures are, and how, not least, you know, the reduction in money available to the council, how that's having an impact. So I've always been a bit loath to, from a public perspective, to sort of deny that information, if you like. But I do see from this committee's perspective that, you know, it's just overwhelming. We could be here for a whole week discussing questions and issues that arise from the report, and it's just not feasible to do that. So, you know, I'm inclined to support what's said there in terms of the new format, and I suppose it's always open then to the committee to demand more information, and we can ask people to come along and we can have this sort of comprehensive report. But I wouldn't want to lose sort of, like I say, this full perspective that we have on what the council's doing. But it's difficult, isn't it? Because here is where we make that information publicly accessible. And we are here to look at that and try and deal with it, but it's just not possible. But if we have less information, then, you know, if you're a member of the public, you're not likely to have that full picture. So, but I think on balance, for the purposes of this committee's job, then I think it does have to be more manageable, because it's, you know, it's difficult to see the wood for the trees with a report of this size. But I don't know how we overcome making that information available to the public. Would it, for example, if someone wanted to see the sort of report here that we have, would that be available to them?
I mean, just to answer that particular point, there used to actually be quite strict statutory requirements on councils to publish performance data back in the days of the Audit Commission, which have gone, and we don't routinely tend to publish performance data unless it happens to be contained in a report for a committee such as this. I mean, we certainly can do so. I think I'd be nervous about us sort of getting back into a sort of mentality of only sort of recording stuff for the purpose of them being able to publish it. I mean, performance management should be something that goes on day to day in services, and we shouldn't really be producing data that isn't sort of normally used and available within service departments. But I think if there was a desire from members for us to publicly publish some data sort of purely for the purposes of being transparent to the public, I mean, that's something we can obviously fulfil.
I mean, honestly, I think the summary is very good on this, and I think that's what to build on, isn't it? So we'll get a summary out there, yeah? Oh, it's from the start, the first appendix 1 and 2. But still acronyms in there, John, which we need to take out. I mean, there's something, the very last page, 104, financial services are maintaining strong performance in the main BAU areas. Business as usual. I think that's easy to put in, isn't it? Rather than well, yeah. Any points then? George?
Sorry.
Just supporting where we're going with it in the future, I think on balance, I support what the report's saying.
I wonder whether or not we could help this process by putting the risk register, the Appendix 4, first, because actually that provides a fantastic executive summary, and also to have it. I've gone through with numbers. If it says a high risk, I've given it 3. If it says medium, I've given it 2, and if it's low risk, I've given it 1, and applied it to each of the 3 risk likelihood, risk impact, and current risk status, which means that the very first one on page 305, there are 3 high risks, they make 9. And anything over 6 is something we should focus on. So if it's 2 mediums and a high, it becomes 7. And if it's 3 mediums, it's 6, so we think, okay, we're just about, but actually it's a really good, I think it's a very good way of looking at it. If you do as a numerical answer and go right the way through it, you can see, if you just looked at children's services, you can see there's a high risk in terms of demand pressures leading to increased workloads for social care staff. Then refocusing staff time on more vulnerable families on the next page is 8, because it's 2 highs and a medium. Then at the bottom of the next page, page 307, it's failure to attract sufficient high quality teaching and school leader posts is 9. And actually that focuses, we can see that is what we should be focusing as a council, and the officers should be focusing on remedying or addressing, and we as members of GANS can look at this and say, yeah, okay, that's really, it's very well argued, very articulate. Of course, the problem with this is that some directors seem to be more articulate and assiduous than others, but where you get it, yes, or some, I mean, some. Yeah. Well, you'd expect it, sort of all binary, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, something. Yes, exactly. But I think it's a useful tool, and if we had that first, and the point to which it referred in what we would call Appendix 1, which could then be Appendix 2 or 3, if we thought, oh, we better read that, we can actually read that, and because we're interested in its importance and significance to the council in terms of risk likelihood, risk impact, and current risk status. And if it isn't actually mentioned in the report, the question is, why isn't it? Since it's in the risk register. So as a helpful way of doing it, I think that's a good start. I would be very reluctant to lose a lot of the information, although dog kennels and various other things are not, I don't think, are necessarily strategic problems for the council. And I am reminded of the episode of Yes, Prime Minister, where he said he wanted to know what he didn't know, and they gave him absolutely everything that he didn't know, and therefore he didn't know anything at the end of it. And I have a feeling that with 225 pages of this, we've somehow gone along that particular line, because there are various things in here that they don't want us to know, but they've hidden it among things that they don't mind that we don't know. So, but there are issues, I think, that are raised from this. The first is, I think I've said before, and at least twice, that I need to feel, and we as a committee should feel, that directors aren't marking their own homework. And there are a number of RAG ratings that I think have slipped through a net that if somebody else were looking at them, wouldn't have been allowed to do so. And trends. So if I look at page 111, as an example, just it's sort of where am I? Okay. It talks about the numbers. This is percentage of it's social workers. A number of issues resolved through challenge and escalation process, and it says the baseline is 45. The key progress in Q1 is 3, which does not. If you think about that, 3 is not anywhere near a quarter of 45. 18 is more than a quarter of 45. And it's amber, but actually it's I don't know whether it's, the other thing I don't know is whether we should be looking for it to be more or less, because I can't tell whether or not we should be looking at a lower figure or a higher figure than the one that is the baseline, or whether we should just be heading for the baseline. Because the problem that we have in a lot of these things, in these reports, is we are subject to the vicissitudes of life in that if demand picks up, it's not our fault necessarily. I can't, if we have dysfunctional families, we can't say that's the council's fault that we've suddenly got 15 more children in care than we had the month before. And I don't understand how we can do a RAG rating for that, because it's just we can't even I don't think say that we perform well or badly. It's just whether or not we've performed well with the additional burden on the service that we would be looking to look at, but not whether or not we have more than we expected or fewer than we expected, because that is not something that is performance as far as the council is concerned. I mean, I don't know whether anyone has a view on that, but say we had 113 children in care one month and 137 the next. No one's going to say it's the council's fault that we've got 24 more children. It could be they arrived in a boat or something. It's a question of whether or not how we performed in terms of looking after them and putting them in adequate care as soon as possible. And I don't therefore see that those figures, where they happen, are useful in terms of what we expect to happen. It's what we do. It's that old thing. It's not adversity that makes the person, it's what they do in adversity that makes them. So there are things like that I think, I don't know whether John would agree, but as performance indicators, they're not very useful, because they have no impact on the impact on the cost of us providing the services, but we are not responsible for increasing them. We may be responsible for getting fewer people to smoke, for example, which having been converted to the beauties of vaping, I completely agree with. But that is a part of a strategy, and we accept that's going to happen. But rough sleepers and homeless people as well are not necessarily the council's fault, unless we happen to be more accommodating than other councils, in which case we might look at that. But again, it's not a very good indicator of whether or not we're performing well. It's just we are subject to vicissitudes, and the RAG rating doesn't help in that respect.
Chairman, I think there is general agreement that the report's too much, but you do need some information. Yeah. The difficulty I think we've now got is, as you said at the opening, this is something for the new committee to determine, with the advice of perhaps even some of the members who may not be on that committee, because you may be doing other things. You may be on dealing with other matters of council business after May, but it'd be useful to get everyone together to have that discussion.
We need to have a meeting to discuss quarter 3 before the end of March. Then, but we must have one more.
Yes, sure.
So, I mean,
if you want it then as well.
Well, I'm not saying we necessarily do want, but we certainly should be making a progress in that direction. And I hope that we have I hope that the chairmanships of these committees can be more consistent than they have in the last sort of few years, because actually what happens is you lose a chairman and we're back to square one-ish, maybe square 1.15, but nowhere near square 2 or 3 where we really intended to be. But we are going to presumably have another meeting of GNS before PERDA.
It's on the agenda of the 8th of March.
you saying that you don't want us to go through any of the points? Well, you don't really want me to go through all the points because I mean there are too many. But well, there are just that's the problem.
What time do you make?
Exactly 2:30. Are you not at that? Well, what I can say is it provides a read. I'm not sure it's that exciting in some respects, but what it does, what we are not doing again is being quantitative about it or qualitative. I mean, for example, the big things that really matter are what I would say the risks that are 9, and where we go to that risk register as I was talking about earlier. If all of the ones that are 9 are in order, and then all the ones that are 8 in order, and we actually see what we think are the risks to the council providing the services that they want to provide, or we want to provide as well as we want to provide them, that is where we can then focus our attention and ask what is happening. But if they're hidden, and I don't mean that pejoratively, but they just happen to be in the midst of absolutely masses of other information, we are more likely to miss them or not to see the significance of them when we could do with seeing both the significance and not missing them. So I agree that we have to do something, but I would also ask that we do one additional thing, which is to make sure we know where the trend is, because there is no, and I think I've asked this as well before, if it's green now, was it green last quarter, or was it amber last quarter? In other words, are we seeing improvement? If it's red now, was it red last quarter, or was it green last quarter, in which case it's got a significant deterioration, or is amber to red, amber to green, or even red to green? Because that also allows us as a committee to determine whether or not there's a marked improvement or something where we need to look closely at whatever the point is, because in essence both of them without any context are much less useful. So the marking the homework, I know it's something that Michael Lord is delighted to do. It's got nothing else to do in his life, but have we actually had them marked by anybody else, or is it just sort of someone paying lip service to me?
I mean, I could just answer a couple of points. I mean, firstly, note everything said, and that's really helpful in our thoughts about how to improve it for the future. I think the marking homework thing. I mean, we sort of use that phrase slightly colloquially. There are procedures in place to ensure that people's views around performance are properly sort of sense checked, and I mean Kelly does a degree of that herself. Excuse me. A certain amount goes on through a corporate governance group, and a certain amount goes on through portfolio holders and their briefings with directors. I mean we don't have a process by which everyone's report sort of goes to the chief executive and he personally goes through and sort of marks it with a red pen as such, but there is a degree of challenge built into it. Talking about risks, I mean it's worth just saying that obviously risk management and performance management are kind of two different disciplines, and I mean we have very deliberately and consciously brought them together for the purpose of these reports, because I think it's helpful to provide members a view both of risk and of performance. I mean, if members' preference is that sort of we have a process to manage and report performance, and then a separate one around sort of keeping track of the council's key risks and what we're doing around those, I mean, we can break those two sort of reporting areas out again, if that would be a more useful way of doing it for members.
I'm suggesting that they were reversed, that they become the executive summary of what the problems may or may not be. And talking about the RAG, there was page 109, if I might just draw the committee's attention to it and everyone else's. And this is an example of where I think I looked at it and I thought, on the third point, it says reduced care periods measured by average days in care. And it goes 0 to 5, 6 to 13, and 14 plus. The only one of those that actually is within the range that's put in the range on the second column is age 14 plus, when it's 1,131 days and 1,128 days. The others are well outside it, and yet it's just amber, when in fact it should be red, red and green. There should have been 3 categorisations, to my mind. I mean, it just doesn't... What do you do? Take 2 reds and a green and turn it into amber? I mean, but actually it's really important, because in fact these are absolutely vital. The days, the 0 to 5s and the 6 to 13s tell society whether we're going to have to spend a lot of money on prisons in future if we don't get it right at that point. And these are absolutely key to, in my opinion, what children's services is all about. Now, the fact it's inside the report somewhere, it's not actually at the top, and all the rest of it is it's the director's choice, clearly. But we know that care for people for the first 1,000 days, from conception to age 2, are absolutely vital, and we have no child psychotherapists in this. We've got rid of them, apparently. We have none of them. But you know, we don't. That's not in here. It's not the priorities are not shown. It's just, you know, it's partly what's happened, and we think, oh yeah, it's fine, and move on. But we're not digging deeply enough into things that really matter, as opposed to dog kennels that obviously matter to some people, but not very much to me and to the committee. So I don't know how you can reflect in a report, in the way that we describe it, what actually is essentially key to the service performance of a council.
I think that does bring us back quite neatly to what I said in the introduction about, I mean, my suggestion is, sort of as we look at this in the future, is that we do base performance less around what individual directorates want to do, and make it more about how the council is performing against what its key priorities are. And obviously, I mean, as you've rightly alighted on, our ability to keep children safe is absolutely a key priority for the council, and it's absolutely right that you're able to derive a lot of reassurance about that, and you're probably much more interested in that, rightly, than you are in what I might be able to tell you about the functioning of the HR department, for example. And that's absolutely right. I think performance reporting should be based around what the key priorities are for the council, and I think that's definitely something we'd like to sort of incorporate more into the report into the future, I think.
I have obviously lots and lots of questions about this, but there's no point in going into them, because it would actually, as Councillor Ferret says, we'd be here till the middle of next week and we don't have time. But it is useful to know, and just as an aside, someone was asking about some education projects we had going on, and some of my colleagues were unaware of them, and I said, well, I recommended this as a tome to be read. If they want to know what's happening in the council, then this is the thing to read. And they might not be able to prioritise them particularly because they're not well prioritised in themselves, but it is a pretty comprehensive document.
Yeah, and just not wishing to prolong things, but just part of the when this started to grow and there was more information, and part of the thinking behind it was that clearly opposition spokespersons in those particular areas would have a lot of source information, and they should be raising that information and discussing that in briefing meetings with the portfolio holder. So, you know, it was seen as an aid for them in terms of information available. But whether it has been used like that, I don't know. But, you know, it's been there as a resource.
Thank you.
So I would argue, therefore, that it's not the quantum of the information, perhaps with the way it's laid out, but having that information available but not necessarily having to read it was pretty good, because I would be reading the 9s. But there are people in the committee, and there are other colleagues and members. There would be, I'm sure, who might want to read about other things that are not quite as interesting to me. And the fact that they're there is important.
Yes. Can we note the report? Can we note the continued improvement in quality of report from the directorates. Can we agree if any further action is required? And I think some of the points you brought up, Ian, hopefully you'll take on board. I know the reports for 1920 will be provided in a streamlined format as per section 4 of the report. That, of course, will be with the agreement of the committee.
Hopefully, as with the suggestions that we've made, sort of brought into. Well, I mean, not.
You come on to 3. Yeah.
We want to bring this through to the next committee, whoever that might be, as already in the format, rather than them having to reinvent the wheel again, because that would be just a tragedy.
We're talking about a streamlined one, or I don't know if there could be an example for the next meeting, or whether the format will be the same for the March meeting. Presumably, it will be.
I'm making the assumption it will be in this format for the March meeting, because obviously that sort of takes it through the year. But I mean, I can bring, if it's helpful, sort of the form in this format, and then a sort of a template of what I propose next year might look like.
Could I make a suggestion, John, that actually what we have is with one of the directors' reports, whichever one you decide, but probably something like adult social care or children's services, because they are overspent and crucial. Sorry, I didn't.
Thank you. Can I tell you the date of the next meeting is the 8th of March, presumably here at 10:30 a.m. I've kept to the dates that were agreed before I came on board here. Okay, thank you very much.